Welcome. My name is Séverine Martin. I'm the director of Columbia's undergraduate program in Paris, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today for the inaugural conversation of New Utopias, a series of panel discussions on the world to come presented by the European Institute, the Columbia Global Center Paris, and the Alliance program. We hope today's conversation, called Can Local Agriculture Save the World? A big topic. We hope it will provide for some stimulating insights into the future. I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Lorenzo Kilgren-Grandi, who is the chair of the Globalization, Territories, and Integration Working Group at the International Association of Schools and Institutes of Administration. He is the co-founder and chair of Urban Flag, and a lecturer in city diplomacy at Sciences Po, Columbia University in Paris, and the École Polytechnique. His primary expertise and research interests are in the international action of cities and their multilateral response to global challenges, such as sustainable development, intercultural dialogue, and digital transition. So after this little introduction, I will pass on the mic to Lorenzo. And just for our audience, note that there will be a time for a Q&A discussion at the end of the conversation. Lorenzo, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Séverine, for this kind introduction, and good evening or good morning, well, depending on which side of the Atlantic you are currently in. My name, as you said, it's Lorenzo Kilgren-Grandi, and I would like to add, I am also the director of the City Diplomacy Lab that recently opened at the Columbia Global Center to match the research and the practice of city diplomacy to make sure that this international action of cities benefit urban communities everywhere in the world. And it's really an honor to share this virtual stage with three distinguished panelists. Ms. Liliana Annovazzi-Jacob, the Chief of Section of the UNECE FAO Forestry and Timber Section, Forestry, Land and Housing Division at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Professor Pamela Ann Donofrio-Koch, Mary Schwartz-Rose Associate Professor of Nutrition Education, Faculty Director at the Laurie M. Tisch Center for Food Education and Policy at the Teachers College, Columbia University. And Mr. Filippo Gavazzeni, head of the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact Secretariat at the Municipality of Milan. And I would like also to thank and welcome Ms. Aliénor de Toisy. She will facilitate the Q&A session that we will have at the end of this roundtable, and she will also ask the first question. All around this roundtable, please feel free to use the Q&A section to, in fact, add your question. We will gather them and answer at the last part of the webinar. So we are gathered here to question whether local agriculture can feed the world. It's a challenging question, of course. And we ask this question in a moment of crisis, where the situation of food systems are in fact exacerbated by the pandemic crisis. And I can highlight, just to sum up, three main challenges that are faced by food systems. Well, first of all, food security and food safety. According to the World Food Programme, across the world, there are up to 111 million people that do not have enough food on their plate. The World Bank reports that this situation is also worsening due to a global inflation of food price everywhere in the world. Second point, climate change. In fact, food systems are a huge component of climate change, a major cause of climate change. A recent study that has been published in a scholarly paper proves that 34% of the total greenhouse gases emissions are to be linked to food production, supply chain, and consumption. And finally, loss and waste. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, 1/3 of the global food production never finds its way onto our plates. So this is even, in fact, this last point is supposed to worsen even more if the expanding urban societies across the world will adapt a Western nutrition lifestyle. So this is definitely a complex and quite grim landscape. I don't want to put you in a depressing mood, but we are in fact aiming to do the opposite here with the new Utopias series. As Severine said, we want to imagine a better future, and we think that this future can be anchored on the positive change that we are already seeing, which we already experience in our everyday life. And one of that is in fact local agriculture. And then local agriculture can represent an important answer to those challenges. And this is in fact given by three main drivers for this process. The first one is innovation. The second one is necessity. And the third one is the political desire of both central and local leaders and citizens for a more sustainable development and environmentally friendly food systems. So all that together is providing formal and informal opportunities for responses to those major challenges that I mentioned. And I think this can, in fact, play an even more important role in the future. As said, we will have now a roundtable with our guests, and we will have basically this roundtable divided in two parts. The first one is to give the state of the art of local food system, understand what they are, how they function, what are the challenges. And the second part, we will try to put ourselves in this frame of mind of the new utopias and try to identify what will be the best path to more sustainable, more equal food systems with the support of local agriculture. And the third part will be this Q&A section. Well, I would like to start immediately with a question to Pamela. So Pamela, you are a teacher and a researcher, and you work on how system thinking can help us make decisions about the present and the future of food. And well, of course, we have seen the present is a little bit challenging for the reasons we mentioned. And from your perspective, could you please frame to what extent it makes sense to think in terms of local food systems and to produce more locally?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me, and I really look forward to being on this panel with everyone. One of the first reasons, from my perspective as a researcher, well, let me actually say that I'm going to start with why we would want to produce food more locally. And I think really one of the first reasons is that when people are connected to farms, how food is grown, they know that food is being grown, that they would possibly be eating somewhere around them, whether that's immediately in their community, in their surroundings, or in their region. That actually makes them understand and care more about farmers and be able to make choices about how they want food to be produced, what they want to happen on farms, what kind of food they want to be produced, how they want farm workers to be treated, how they want farms to be able to fit in with community, and what kinds of foods they believe would be actually good for public health. I want to say that this line of thinking, I want to credit Dr. Joan Gassau, who has been teaching a course called Nutritional Ecology here at Teachers College since 1970. She's 93 and still teaching the course, and I've been teaching it with her. And she started talking about local eating at that time in 1970. And what she realized is that she saw how much less people were connected to farms over the decades of her life. She was born in 1928, over the decades of her life after World War II and when there was changes. And she said, if people don't understand agriculture, they're not going to be able to be the citizens that we need that make choices about food. And we need to be able to make those choices. The second reason for why to have more localized food system is it makes it easier to have a food supply that supports public health. One of the biggest challenges we are having globally right now is that people are not eating around the globe enough fruits and vegetables of what is recommended that people eat. And they are eating a much higher percentage of ultra processed foods than what is recommended to be healthy and what research has found is healthy. When people are eating not enough fruits and vegetables and too many ultra processed foods, they have worse metabolic outcomes as well as they're not able to fight infectious diseases such as COVID-19. And sadly, we have seen that around the globe. And so when we have more local food systems, it is easier to have foods that are more whole, closer to how they've come from nature, are the kinds of foods that people want to eat in their region. So it just makes it easier. It doesn't mean it's necessarily automatically better for public health, but it makes it much easier to be able to have diets that support public health. So that's two reasons why. And now I want to talk about how do we actually try to produce more food locally. One of the first things that I want to say is sometimes when I've talked to people, they're like, well, not everywhere in the world can produce all the food that they need. And I feel like that all or nothing thinking can sometimes be very limiting to thinking about local. What I will think we want to be thinking about is what makes sense to produce locally in what places. What is good for the ecosystem? What is good for farmers? What is good for the local economy in each place? Second is when we think about eating local food systems, sometimes we can think about a specific distance around a place. And I think we want to start to think about what does local mean in each place. I live in New York City, which is a very big, pretty densely populated city. We actually have a lot of ocean going towards Europe right on one side of us. And so in terms of thinking about what would be the region that would produce for New York City, it is not a very close region. It is going to have to be a further region if that is what we are thinking about. And in the United States, we have states, and there are several states that are close by. So when we have our farmers markets, we think about all of the surrounding states and the farms that can come in from those states. And we have more and more farmers markets in New York City that are expanding. And so that is one way that we are bringing in local food. We also, I do a lot of work with New York City public schools and school meals. And there is a big incentive to get food from New York State because that helps the New York State economy. So New York City public schools will get food from other states as well, but there's a special focus on food from New York State farms to help support the New York State economy. So the point is, just like not all or nothing, but thinking about that local can be defined differently based on the region. I have many students that live in China, and China has many large cities, and they have talked about there too, that if there was a more localized food system there, that they would have to think larger in terms of a region producing food for a place. The third way to do this is to learn from indigenous people. People that have lived in a place for generations will know a lot about what we need to actually produce food there because they have done it for generation after generation. And so learning from that knowledge is really, really important. Fourth reason why to do this, which goes exactly with the topic of this session, is to really think about local food systems as our future. Sometimes people say, oh, you're trying to turn back to the past. We actually haven't had true local food systems in quite a long time. We are transporting more food than ever before and more fresh food than ever before, but it is a smart way to look forward. What we want to be thinking about now is what are the kinds of food systems that are going to sustain our planet and sustain people, which I believe would include really thinking about regional food systems for all the reasons that I said before. But what we want to be thinking about now is not what we did before and can we go back to that, but what makes sense for the rest of the 2020s, 2030s, 2040s, and beyond that is going to be supporting farmers, eaters, the planet, and a system that we know will be able to last generations and generations into the future. Fifth, we should be thinking about food as both a human right and a public utility. And I want to share a quote by a writer, Molly Anderson, who was writing about food as a human right. And this is to quote Molly Anderson: thinking about access to food as a right, rather than a privilege of those with sufficient purchasing power to buy good food, fundamentally changes how we see causes of and solutions to food insecurity. Public understanding of hunger and food insecurity has undergone radical transformation in the last century, from the view that hunger is inevitable or just punishment for laziness or other sins, to the view that hunger is a delimited social problem that must be remediated for moral reasons, to the view that hunger and malnutrition of all kinds, overnutrition as well as undernutrition, are entrenched in the socio-political context and the food environment. So that ends the quote. So just like we want everyone to be able to have clean water and clean air, if we thought about food as a human right, that's really different than having it be an economic basis. And then food as a public utility. And this is from Richard Levins, who wrote in a publication that's a US publication, the Land Institute, in 2014. He talks about how food systems are so important that they just might need to be regarded as a public utility, and then goes on to ponder the question of what if the free market system, which is what's governing food now, simply does not work to be able to have sustainable and local agriculture. And then sixth and finally, I think for more local food systems, when we want to start thinking about what to produce regionally in a place, is we want to think about fruits and vegetables. As we've said, worldwide, most people are not meeting recommendations for fruits and vegetables. These are harder to transport and typically taste better when they are fresher, so people are going to eat them more. And so we want to use innovative ways to be able to grow fruits and vegetables in different regions, using things like greenhouses that can extend the growing season in places where the climate is colder, or using new innovations that are starting to work, which are having solar panels and very hot places, and then having vegetables growing underneath those, which actually is good. It's producing energy as well. It is actually keeping the crops from not getting too hot in a very hot sun because they're getting enough sun. And it also is retaining water in the soil, so not using as much water. So just to review, what if we want to move towards local, we should get away from all or nothing thinking about what makes sense to be local. Make local work for the place that we are growing it in. 3, learn from indigenous people. 4, look at future oriented, not trying to go back to the past. 5, think of food as a public utility and human right. And 6, start with growing more local fruits and vegetables around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pamela. I have to say, so much food for thought from your part. Thank you so much. I think we will circle back to many of those topics throughout this conversation. And I think there is a good connection between your contribution and the one from Filippo, because you mentioned the topic of food as a right. And as well as food in terms of innovation, but also connected to the ancient wisdom, to the locals, and so on. Well, this is something that the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact is pursuing, not at the national, but at a local level, exactly. And well, it is really, I'm really happy to have this, as Filippo representing this initiative that I contributed in creating back in 2014 and 2015 when I was an officer at the municipality of Milan. And well, so Filippo, I would like to ask you, from the perspective of the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact that counts today 217 cities and 400 million citizens, which I invite you, of course, to present us what it means, what are the main activities, how are cities collaborating to improve their local food systems, and what is the tangible impact of such a collaboration?
Thank you, Lorenzo, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I would like to spend a couple of minutes explaining what is the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact. That is well, a global platform of mayor of cities that has been launched by the mayor of Milan back in 2015 during Expo, which main issue was feeding the planet. And to date, the Pact represented the first and the most important platform in which cities can exchange and learn best practices to make their food system more inclusive and sustainable. So the Pact is open to all mayors that see food as an entry point for, let's say, the sustainable development in for growing cities. There are many aspects that we cover under the Pact, so we try to give an holistic approach. So we start from the governance of the food system to sustainable diets or social and economic equity. So the right to food, for example, that was mentioned before, to food production. So all the food policies connected to sustain and foster the urban and the peri-urban agriculture, creating also rural-urban linkages. And also other aspects connected to logistics of food. If you think, for example, that is very connected to the food production. But if you think, for example, to the competencies that the mayors have, for example, in organizing food markets and also the wholesale markets. And then all the aspects connected to preventing food waste. So I will also mention afterwards some example of cities that are active on urban and peri-urban agriculture, but let me give you a couple of examples on how we are working. That is then the question. So this network of cities is working by, in a sense, expressing their interest in advance in some specific issues and the knowledge that we acquire from cities that are more advanced in that issue, and the role of the secretariat that is here in the mayor's office of Milan is to match the learning needs and the most advanced cities to create this exchange and advance together. We are doing this, for example, organizing a global and regional forum of mayors on specific issues. So we have just organized in Barcelona the global forum 1 month ago on the nexus among food and climate prior to the COP26. That was the pre-COP was hosted here in Milan. And we are doing this also through the Milan Pact Awards. That is an initiative of the municipality of Milan that is useful because by participating to the Milan Pact Awards, cities are showcasing what they are doing. And so we know on what they are proficient and what they need to advance. I would like to share one thing about the pandemic period before going to a couple of cases. So the COVID pandemic shown us the importance of peri-urban agriculture and urban agriculture under different perspectives. I would like to mention a couple of them. First of all, it was important at the very beginning to guarantee access to food at the very beginning of the lockdown. Because there was, let's say, a shock in the food supply in cities, and some cities noticed also as the implementation in the years before of the community gardens, for example, helps citizens not to, let's say, overcrowd, for example, wholesale, let's say, food markets, and also it was also useful for this is an indirect effort to for the mental health of people that during the toughest, let's say, moment of the lockdown were able to farm and to produce in their community gardens. So we have many cities, but we can go ahead during the Q&A if you want, from around the world that are in mayors that are investing efforts on the creation of community gardens and on the urban agriculture. So we go from Rio de Janeiro with the Hortas Cariocas program that is well distributed in the neighborhoods of the cities, of the cities, and they are at the same time also hiring people with, let's say, social fragilities that are dealing with the organization of this program that we can shift to, for example, to La Paz, that is focusing on the creation of garden and orchard managed by schools, and this is also important for the future. I mean, they are educating future generation that will probably eat healthier and are more interested in the food produced locally. Then we can go, so we can move from the other part of the world, and then I stop because I think I finished the time, to the city of Bandung in Indonesia, to which we are working closely. They are working not just in creating this program, this called Buruan Sae, just with, let's say, with the community orchard, but also by implementing more advanced model with with an hydroponic system. So I'll stop here, and then I can go ahead with some other thoughts in the second round. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Filippo, for bringing us in this small and fascinating tour across the cities in the world. And I think it's very valuable to adopt the municipal approach that you have presented us, a municipal approach that is rooted in local needs and specifics, but also has the capacity of creating connection in a very multilateral way in order to collaborate on the shared targets and the shared challenges. And I would like now to move from one extreme to the other of the social prospect, basically going to the local, to the international. And well, we have Liliana representing here the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. And I would like to ask you, from your perspective at UNECE and collaborating with the FAO as well, what are the main challenges in terms of food production, supply, loss, and waste?
Thanks much. And yes, it's true that for us, working with cities, working with the local level is somewhat new, but it's inevitable. I mean, we cannot continue without looking at cities, at these huge centers where a lot is happening. Now, obviously, cities with a massive supply and with seasonal differences, people used, and I'm coming back to what Pamela said before, I mean, we're so used to eating grapes all year round when in fact we cannot produce grapes in our parts of the world. We cannot produce oranges in our parts of the world, but we want them. So there's a lot of seasonal differences, massive supplies needed. I also observed the same thing as Pamela stressed. There's very weak connections between hinterland, regional, and local agriculture, and the city dweller who has lost connection. Coming to what Filippo said, what we also observe a lot is this unexploited potential of food production, actually not only in the hinterland, in be it local or regional, but also within the city boundaries. So here, coming to the utopian pictures, nature-based solutions, agroforestry, urban gardens, food forests. Again, things are happening, and I'm joining here Filippo in his examples. There are other very, very impressive examples where skyscrapers are built in China for 40,000 people, and within these skyscrapers, there's a whole self-sustained food supply chain that manages cultivation, harvest, sale, and consumption within just one building. We've heard about rooftop gardens, very impressive, you know, in a rooftop of a shopping center in Melbourne that has 2,500 square meters of rooftop farm, provides immediately fresh produce for the rooftop restaurant. So also a zero waste loop going on there. I would also rejoin what Pamela said, this story of linking people in urban centers back to local levels, back to the farm and back to the farmers. Super important. In addition to that, the collaboration, the coordination and integration of approaches at national levels, at international levels, and very important, at local levels. A lot of things are happening at local levels, but the national policymakers don't react. Filippo mentioned just before the community gardens, the orchards, very important here, the role of trees. Yes, I'm the chief of forestry, so trees are close to my heart, but I come with a food background. And I think the two, linking forests and their ecosystems to agricultural land use and agricultural land use distribution is super important. We have very, very grave effects of not linking it. We have seen deforestation, we have to feed a lot of people. So I think there is a lack of coordination currently that challenges mandates, that challenges resources, and ultimately mean a lot of missed opportunities. In addition to that, and coming back to what Pamela said, the close connection to the farmer and this valuing food again also brings us to one of these solutions to our waste problem. The footprint of cities is huge. In fact, in the urban context, we waste a huge amount, often between 70 and 80% of the world's food. So this is a huge, obviously not everything is edible, but only a fraction of this perfectly edible food is currently redistributed or re-commercialized. So here again, huge untapped potential. In closing my remarks, I think I'm really joining my colleagues in stressing that it is important to eat healthy, and that means short supply chains, and short supply chains are possible. Whether within the boundaries of a city or close to the city, but it is possible, and we should not say, no, we can't do it. There, in Atlanta, Georgia, for example, there are food forests. A fabulous new idea of actually bringing, again, as Filippo said, the world of food closer also to children, to the city dwellers, but also maybe at one stage and at one point in the future, actually a serious production method. So it is, for me, the urban context and what we see is really an ecosystem that needs integrated solutions, that value multiple benefits, that do not benefit from sector-specific focus. We really need to look at how we can link all these different ideas, be it community orchards, tree protection, education, fresh fruit within the city boundaries, fresh fruit from close by. And I think the smart way to go forward, as was said by Pamela, is really the combination of all this, and that can really create a new utopia, a new way of reinventing the food system. You might know that the Secretary General of the United Nations convened for the first time ever a food system summit, and the aim of the game was not to hear how great everybody is and how great things are, but actually to find ways of doing things differently. And I think cities are definitely at the forefront, and it's really called for that we reflect on how to do things differently when there are a lot of options already. Thank you, Lorenzo.
Thank you very much, Liana, for connecting the dots. In fact, we can see there is this alignment between different actors, university, local governments, intergovernmental organizations, to go towards this local and sustainable approach to food systems. And well, I propose we move to the second part, which is the one where we'll do our best to imagine the possible of the words. And well, I would like to start with Pamela and ask you, from your perspective, what will be the future of nutrition? What the future of nutrition will look like? What kind of transition are the most needed in local food systems?
Thank you for that great question. Sorry, it took me a second to unmute. And sorry that I have this like very sunny day, and this usually doesn't do this anyway, so I look a little strange.
Wonderful.
Anyway, I think actually the synergy between what all of us is doing is just amazing. And I want to say before I get into the future of nutrition is, for anyone that is out there listening, if you are ever in New York City, you can look me up, because if you come to New York City, you would probably go to Midtown, where there isn't a lot of food growing. But outside of that area, there is a lot of food being grown in New York City, and school gardens are completely on the increase. I would love to take anyone to go see my good friend, Tony Hillary, who has an organization called Harlem Grown that is growing food all over Harlem, which is very close to where I am right now. So now getting to what is the future of nutrition? Nutrition science is a pretty new science. As probably most of you know, vitamins weren't discovered until the early 1900s. I actually was in line in a supermarket once in the 1980s and met a man who was taking a nutrition class at Cornell University in upstate New York the year vitamin A, the first vitamin, was discovered, and said he followed it. And it just made me so aware of how new the science is. What is the most tried and true, never been faltered nutrition advice that is given is people who eat a strong foundation of a whole food, plant-based diet are healthier. So the diet to health connection starts with a strong foundation of a whole food, plant-based diet. People who do this, from epidemiological studies to intervention studies, have fewer risk factors for metabolic diseases, and as I said before, stronger immune systems for fighting infectious diseases. We of course know that it is particularly important to make sure that people have enough total calories and protein, and for areas of the world where there is real hunger and population food insecurity, that is really, really important too. So that is where we should be starting the foundation of the future of nutrition, of what is the most tried and true information. I want to share a very quick story. When I was in college studying nutrition in the 1980s, it was when there was the first discovery of beta carotene, which is a derivative of vitamin A, may be beneficial. And I remember there were all these ads and all these magazines that I was looking at because I was very interested in nutrition that said beta carotene, get it from all of these vegetables. And they were sponsored by a pharmaceutical company who made supplements. And then once beta carotene was put into a pill, they changed the ad and they said, you used to need all of these vegetables. Now it's much easier. Take this pill. Some of you may remember that when there was a research trial on, so let's just give people beta carotene, it actually had to be stopped early because particularly for people who were smokers, increased beta carotene itself increased risk of lung cancer. We don't understand all of the different things that are in those plant-based foods that are healthy for people to eat. What we do know is they keep people healthy. So what I believe we need much more of in the future is more research, not on nutrition science, some on nutrition science, but more research on how do we create food systems with these local and regionalized food supplies like everyone has been talking about, and how do we figure out what does make sense to transport around the world. Like Liliana, you mentioned grapes and oranges. Maybe it doesn't make sense for those to be always available, but sometimes available. And maybe things like coffee people want to have, which only grows in certain parts of the world. Maybe that makes sense, but we need to be doing more research on that. And what else we need is more research on how do we do food and nutrition education in ways that makes people feel inspired to want to eat well, feel like they have the know-how to do it and the confidence, as well as then having an environment that is making those choices easy. And finally, what I think we really need in the future, and this may be somewhat controversial, but is we really need to be actively working on decreasing the amount of ultra-processed foods that are in the food supply. We already know the harmful effects on human health, and we know the harmful effects on sustainability of the planet by creating all of these foods that are by transnational corporations and transport it around the world. So we have to be figuring it out. How do we ratchet down the percentage of ultra processed foods in our food supply while we're ratcheting up the whole foods, fruits and vegetables, like all of us have been talking about? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pamela, for highlighting the contribution that research and education can give to a more human and more sustainable food system, starting from the definitions of what is a local food system, as you mentioned. And I would like to continue talking about the future perspective of local food system, once again moving to the municipal one, and asking to Filippo to share some insight on what the member cities of the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact are doing to get ready to tackle those major challenges that we have mentioned, and to what extent these challenges can be addressed through city diplomacy.
Thank you. So I would like to start giving, let's say, international or global overview, and then going to some specific action that can be undertaken at a local level. So first of all, the obstacle for the future of cities involved in the food system transformation is that in the international community, the role of cities, the key role of cities is not very well established. In the sense that the vast majority of the international processes are at a national and in let's say international organization levels, and there is sometimes or more than sometimes a lack, let's say, between that level, let's say the governmental level and the local one. And this is this is an obstacle, and for this we have been, for example, grateful to have the opportunity to organize at the United Nations Food System Summit a plenary session entirely dedicated to cities and the local food system, in which we asked our mayors to showcase their food policies, their action, and at the same time ask and present their needs towards the international community and the stakeholders. But it was the only moment for local governments. So we need to advocate as MEFP Secretariat, so representing the overall network, to the importance of cities in transforming the food system, because at the end, mayors are at the forefront of providing concrete solutions to, for example, to citizen needs, starting from access to healthy food is a clear citizen needs, and we saw this during the pandemic. So this is the first one, the awareness raising, let's say, on the role of cities, and then also the role that we have been playing also at the European Union level to advocating for issuing call for fundings expressively for cities and urban food systems. So after this, let's say, work that we should strengthen, the European Commission have issued some call dedicated to cities, and from let's say DEAR to Horizon, so expressively recalling the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact principles. But we need more and more, let's say, opportunity for fundings to make the city-to-city diplomacy, city-to-city cooperation on food issue even more concrete. Lastly, I would like to conclude by presenting another point of view connected to urban and peri-urban agriculture that I see in the future, and I can make the example of Milan I try to do it in a couple of minutes. I think that the future, apart from, let's say, community garden or an urban orchard, is also connected to the power that the local municipality have to influence food production around cities. This is public procurement. So our cities, many mayors have under their duties the organization of the school canteen service. What if in the future we work with the peri-urban farmers to create, let's say, district of production, so consortiate them, asking them to produce year by year, let's say, shifting their production, let's say, tools and models, making them more sustainable. So in Milan, we have the agency, the public agency for school canteens that makes a lot of school meals per day, 80,000 meals per day. So you can imagine the leverage that we have to consortiate the peri-urban farmers and asking them year by year to change, let's say, the production model towards a more sustainable ones. And I think that this could be the tool that this leverage that mayors have should be implemented to connect even more and strengthen the urban and peri-urban linkaging towards with public procurement.
Thank you very much, Filippo, for this contribution. You highlighted the capacity of mayors and municipalities to have this awareness raising impact and through public procurement have a series of concrete actions, and this goes on the lines of sustainability as well as equality and I would say social services even. I remember when I was back at the municipality of Milan, we launched this program called Grandparent at School that invited the elderly that was supported by social services to have lunch in canteens for elementary schools, which also not only has a nice impact on the diet of the people in need, but also create a cohesion, social cohesion throughout the generations. And I would like to hand up with a question to Liliana. So to reconnect ourselves to this challenging moment of the pandemic that we have been living all across the planet. It is also an opportunity, as we have said, to reimagine the local food system to be more green and to be more just. What is your view of this exciting but very complex opportunity?
Thanks much, Lorenzo. And I would like to come back in a second to what Filippo just said about how, mayors can influence procurement and the food they actually buy for municipal services, be it school canteens or hospitals or homes for the elderly, whatever it is. I find this a very passionate topic, and I'd like to come back to this. But before that, yes, I think we cannot underestimate what actually this pandemic did to our food systems. And I think I've never heard people talk so much about food and food availability, food needed, particularly in urban areas, than during the pandemic. And let's not forget, the pandemic is not over yet. There's a certain balance back in the system. The restaurants are back open, but with this entire HoReCa center, HoReCa sector being closed, we saw for the first time that there is waste, that there's overproduction, that we import too much, we cannot eat. There's a lot of food lost, a lot of food wasted. So I think going forward, for any kind of, when I hear green recovery or resilience building, obviously, we need to include in this part the preparedness and the response. I mean, this, as far as I understand, we need something far more shockproof than what we currently have, something much more nature inclusive than what we currently have, be it production, but also consumption. And as Pamela said, today it's easier to pop a pill than to actually go to the farmer's market and buy vegetables or fruit. So all this is definitely out for changing. I also think that innovation is super important in this area, and I'll come back to that in a second. Obviously, in all this, let's not forget climate change. There was COVID, but climate change is there and it's there to last. So, by building close urban-rural links, by looking into urban agriculture, by looking into food loss and waste prevention, I think scenarios of revalorizing actually the food for building back better and greener are really, really important. The current situation does not only impact food access, equity, it impacts water, land resources, biodiversity. We are not producing sustainably. And in addition to that, and something we haven't mentioned yet, is the population in cities is ever growing and the world population is ever growing. So, how are we going to face that? So there is a huge distortion between food availability and, on the other hand, food waste. And I think we really need to address that. There's this competition between land and forests, between the need to have, greener areas, but at the same time we need to produce. So it's not easy, and I'm again stressing that without integrative solutions, and here coming back to what Filippo said, integrating solutions at regional, at local, and at national and international level, we're not going to be able to go any step forward. Let me just quickly focus on some of these issues that I've touched upon and start maybe with food loss and waste. A senior scientist from the Barilla Foundations, which does a lot of research into food loss and waste, called food loss and waste the most challenging distortion of the current food system. The UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, went one step further and actually called food loss and waste an ethical outrage. So I think definitely we cannot produce more and more. But at the same time, we waste more and more. And in our developed world, it's really the waste part, which happens at retail level and at consumer level, that has dimensions that require really, really urgently comprehensive approaches to change something. Right now, I feel while there are apps, there are attempts to redistribute food lost, there is not even a measurement of how much food is actually lost or wasted. It's not continuous. It's something that's done from time to time. Obviously, having apps that localize food waste and try to re-commercialize it are great, but we don't have enough yet. We don't have enough ways to distribute this food to charity when food could actually also be commercialized and handed over to hotels or restaurants. Why don't we start with that as well? Filippo mentioned the school canteens, but what about the private businesses? Could they not get involved a bit more? The private sector has come up with a lot of good solutions, but I think as long as we do not understand the scope and the metrics of the problem, we will have difficulties imagining adequate solutions. Again, the private sector here coming, for example, as a great advantage, obviously Milan, Turin, some of these cities that, give innovation grants, that have fiscal policy incentives, that facilitate donations and reuse. So all this super important to go forward. In addition to that, obviously the land use policy, the urban land management is important for these nature-based solutions. So for me, it's important to see cities not only as food wasters or food consumers and irresponsible entities, but cities are a fabulous environment for experiments. I mean, there's nothing similar at the international or the national level. There are only cities that can play this role of innovators, of laboratories per se, and they need to do so. They do have a key role, whether it's already recognized or not. I'm not an expert in. I can see that cities have come up and they're more prominent on the international agenda than they have been 20 years ago, than they have been 30 years ago, or even 10 years ago. So it is something that is coming. At the UN, we are now talking about localizing the Sustainable Development Goals, a fancy word to say actually action has to happen at the local level, be it in cities or in urban areas. But we bring things down to city-based initiatives, to greening, to preventing food loss and waste at all levels. And I think here again, it is important that we understand that food is not only wasted in cities, but it's lost before it even reaches the cities. And here again, if we are closer connected to the farming community, we would know about it and we would be able to reuse it. So, even if COVID and the pandemic showed us how important this problem is, in any given year, we lose 14% of the world production, and then we waste more or less the equivalent further up the supply chain. I believe that urban food systems really need to connect this rural food system and revalue the food lost. We cannot eternally produce more food, and we need to tackle what Filippo also mentioned. We have urban wholesale markets. There are a lot of cities that have started linking urban wholesale markets to restaurant in cities and have them take the leftovers, or to charities. At the UN, at UNECE, I have helped develop an app called Cities for Feed Up, which is blockchain enhanced and tracks and traces where food is lost. So it's the food lost, or what we call this invisible food, is brought back into supply chains and could be commercialized or used to produce innovative new products. I also believe that, for example, the work that international organizations do on planting trees that could absolutely be orchards, cities for food forests could be another idea. So a lot of ideas where urban and peri-urban forestry and agroforestry can have really a crucial role in improving cities' resilience and really facing also the poverty and the lack of food security that we have in many cities.
Thank you, Liliana. Sorry, I have to ask you if you can come to your conclusions, because we have to give floor to the questions. So I am very happy we can see we have some questions already.
No, I just wanted to stress one thing that Filippo said: the mayors and their power to do something and to change something through public procurement. It's not only about the production close by, but let's also look at the food wasted and not only distribute it, but commercialize it. So another idea, we produce enough food to feed the world, but it still doesn't happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Liliana. And very, very interesting approach you suggest to solve those contradictions with a new methodology, learning from what is the most ambitious best practices that are happening right now. I now would like to leave the floor to Ms. Aliénor de Toisy. She will ask the first question.
Yeah, thank you very much for all your talks. It's really interesting. And I wanted to ask my question to Pamela and Kok. I was wondering if you think that going back to short chain supplies meant going back to low-tech processes, or if you think that new technologies, especially in cities such as New York, can actually help us efficiently and sustainably go back to local food systems.
Yeah, thank you. That is a really, really good question. And before I get to that, I just want to say New York City has a new mayor that will be coming in on January 1st, Eric Adams, who is actually a very, very interested in food policy, mostly because of his own personal journey where he's changed his diet to become healthier, which is wonderful. And so look to New York City for hopefully some very innovative food procurement. So to your question, do I think that going back to shorter supply chains means low tech? I think it means smarter technology more than low technology. So I don't think it's not technology, but I think it's thinking about technology in ways that are using as the guardrails. What do we want to be producing that is supporting public health, supporting ecological sustainability, and supporting farmers? So it doesn't mean any technology that's possible should be used. We should be looking at any technological innovation and saying, does this make sense? Maybe to give a couple of examples is, as I said, that we should be having less ultra processed foods in our food supply. The ingredients that are going into most ultra processed foods are from commodity crops such as corn and soy that typically we think of as using a lot of technology to produce them and a lot of inputs. And so if we're having less ultra processed foods, we would be growing less of those, and what we are growing, thinking about the technologies that actually are good for the farming communities that are growing those foods. We then may be thinking of whole new ways of using technology to grow foods. For example, I love the idea, and we've talked about in New York City, particularly in some of the communities in Brooklyn, of having more fruit trees growing in communities that need greening. So then it may be, what do we need to do to care for those trees in a very urban place? And then how do we figure out how we get that food to people in a safe way, which may not be a lot of technology, but would be technology that we can use. I'm a member of a biodynamic CSA farm that I've been in for 25 years. And when I am there, they have all different kinds of like add-ons to the backs of tractors for growing different vegetables to make it easier, because when you're growing a very wide diversity of food and you have people working on the farm, but you want to make sure that you are not taxing people too much or using your farm workers in the most efficient way, it takes innovative ways to try to grow that food. So I think it's a different way of looking at technology, looking at all of the possible negative consequences of that technology before it is introduced, opposed to just moving forward with any technology that seems to get introduced. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you, Aliénor, for your question. And we have already a number of questions from the public as well. And I think we can start with a question for Liliana from Clara Colonna. She asks, through which mechanisms can we incentivize companies in the European Union to use and sell locally produced foods?
Thank you very much. That's a hard question. It's not easy to answer. Obviously, you always have to leverage a fiscal policy and incentives to give for using local producers. And this is something where I live here in Switzerland. This is used extensively. There's there are subsidies, their way of getting people to do it, and companies to do it. There is, I mean, before you heard Filippo how difficult it is in procurement, in public procurement, to get local production into the supply chain, because international companies that import are usually cheaper. So yeah, it's not easy. There is more and more the aspect of corporate social responsibility, which is something also the EU is pushing tremendously. In that area, definitely, I still see ways to improve, and not only the European Union is pushing it, but it's something that's pushed all over the world. Companies have to be made more responsible for how they source and how they sell and what they sell to the customer. Ultimately, obviously, it is also up to the customers. We have a voice, we choose, we have a choice. So that's definitely something we should not forget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liliana. I have a question by Karol Olejniczak. I'm sorry for the bad pronunciation, from Warsaw, Poland. And so I think this question goes to Filippo. Could you share some initiatives on reducing food waste in cities targeted at final consumers, local stores, or small restaurants? Are there any research practitioners networks working on this topic in the context of US cities?
Okay, thank you for the question. Our cities have been implementing different models to preventing food losses and waste, and also dealing with the organic waste in a circular economy perspective. It is the very last part, let's say, of not of the line, but of the circle. Just a couple of examples, and then I would like to give you a couple of words about the model of Milan. So we go from, let's say, from the city of Bruges, that is working on reducing food losses in their hospitals and the catering of the hospitals. That is very peculiar, because you don't know, you should have everything for, let's say, the full capacity of the hospital, but you don't know the day after how many patients and which dietary guidelines they have. So let's say it's very difficult. It's been very difficult to reducing food waste in hospital for this peculiarity of the institution. Then we have different models of cities that are supporting, for example, food banks. And then we have also the fiscal incentive that Liliana mentioned before. And it's something that also we are doing in Milan. Basically, to spur, let's say, the retailers and also, for example, supermarkets to donate food losses instead of throwing them away through a fiscal incentive, for example, by reducing the waste tax. So if you think that cities should pay, and it's quite expensive to manage the organic waste, if companies, let's say, and caterings save the food losses, cities will reduce the tax. And why? It is sustainable, because cities should pay less for the management of the organic waste. That will be fewer. About the Milan model, I just want to mention this because we recently won the first shot prize of the Duke of Cambridge on the category waste-free world. So it's based on a logistic model in which the municipality, let's say, provide for each neighborhood a space in which the food losses of the neighborhoods coming from supermarket, caterings, and so on is gathered in the morning. And in the afternoon, it is given, so in the same day, to the NGOs that are supporting the fragile people. So it's a model in which during the morning everything is gathered, and in that logistic hub, it is it's created, let's say, a mix of product, because, for example, from one supermarket, maybe in that day you will have, I don't know, like 200 eggs and nothing else. But in that hub, you can mix the eggs with the pasta, with the tomato sauce, with the lettuce, and so on, and then it is distributed in the afternoon. Just to conclude, the logistic model is, and also the assessment of the impact is guaranteed by the Polytechnical University, and the connection, the network of the companies that are giving food is guaranteed by Asso Lombarda, that is the company union, that in our case gather all the companies that are dealing with food. Thank you.
Thank you, Filippo, for sharing these best practices. And there is a last question. We are almost out of time, so I will maybe address this question to Pamela, asking to answer, if possible, with headlines. What kind of roles do you see ordinary people, those people who do not work in food supply systems, can play in creating better food systems?
So I think that the most important thing is to continue to talk about food systems. Like we've talked about, like Liliana said, they've been talked about more than ever before. Change the food available in your community. And also what everyone has said on here in some way or another is make sure that children are getting experiences with gardening and cooking and interacting with food, because today's children are tomorrow's adults who will be facing all of the challenges with climate change and public health and creating a sustainable food system that we have now. So giving them great experiences with great food will help them to be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pamela, for ending with this positive note, our future, the next generations. Well, I have to say, I have been reinvigorated in my positive approach to food systems. I think that we have this alignment of the actors that you represent, municipalities, universities, international organizations, to collaborate, to work together, to make sure we don't waste this crisis. In a way, and we make sure that the new normal will be a much more sustainable, just and equal normal. And I would like to thank you once again for participating. Thank, of course, Madame Séverine Martin, Madame Aliénor Detoisy, and now leave the floor to Madame Martin for final remarks and conclusions.
No, just very briefly, a great big thanks from all of us, Columbia's European Institute, the Columbia Global Centers, and the Alliance Program for putting together this really great conversation today, which I think, as Lorenzo said, leaves us actually with a positive feeling because as we were formulating this series, it was kind of new utopias ? And so thank you so much for leading us into the future with some hope and optimism. I wish to thank our international audience as well for engaging with us in this conversation and asking really enriching questions. We hope we will see you again for our next discussion on January 25th, which will address another tough question: can we heal the wounds of the past? Thank you so much, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
See you. Bye.